The morning sun streamed through the massive windows of Atlanta International Airport as Michael Richardson made his way through the crowded terminal. He rubbed his tired eyes and checked his watch, still plenty of time before his flight back to Chicago. After 3 days of intense meetings, his body ached for the comfort of his own bed. Michael adjusted the strap of his leather messenger bag on his shoulder. He'd packed light for this trip, just a carry-on suitcase that he rolled behind him now. No need for anything fancy since most of his time was spent in conference rooms, hammering out the final details of the biggest deal of his career. Coffee, he muttered to himself. Definitely need coffee. He stopped at a busy cafe near his gate, joining the line of equally tired travelers. The barista smiled as he ordered a large black coffee with an extra shot of espresso. While waiting, Michael scrolled through his phone, checking the mountain of congratulatory messages that had been flooding in since yesterday's announcement. The business news headlines still felt surreal. Richardson Ventures acquires Skywave Airlines in landmark deal. After 18 months of negotiations, countless sleepless nights, and more legal documents than he cared to remember, it was finally done. Skywave Airlines, the company he'd first flown with as a college student 23 years ago, was now his. Coffee in hand, Michael found a quiet corner near his gate. He dialed home, smiling when his wife picked up. "Hey you," she said, her voice instantly lifting his spirits. "The conquering hero returns today, huh?" Michael laughed. "Something like that. Though right now I feel less like a hero and more like someone who needs about 12 hours of sleep. The kids can't wait to see you. Tommy's been telling everyone at school that his dad owns airplanes now." "Well, he's not wrong," Michael said, chuckling. "How's Zoe doing with her science project?" As his wife filled him in on their daughter's volcano experiment gone slightly wrong, Michael watched the gate area begin to fill with passengers. His flight to Chicago would board soon, and for once, he was looking forward to the journey. As the new owner, he wanted to experience Skywave's service as a regular customer, though he'd splurged on a first-class ticket as a small celebration of the deal. "I should go," he told his wife. "Looks like they're getting ready to board soon. I'll text when we land. Love you. And Michael, I'm really proud of you." Those simple words meant more to him than all the business accolades in the world. 20 years ago, when he'd started his first company out of their tiny apartment, few people believed a young black man from the south side of Chicago could build what he had built. But his wife had never doubted him, not once. Michael tucked his phone away and gathered his things. The gate agent had arrived at her station and was setting up the boarding announcements. He took a final sip of his coffee, tossed the cup in a nearby bin, and straightened his casual button-up shirt. He hadn't bothered with a suit today. After 3 days of formal business attire, his comfortable jeans and favorite navy shirt felt like a luxury. The overhead speaker crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin boarding Skywave Airlines Flight 1157 to Chicago. We invite our first-class passengers to board at this time." Michael reached for his boarding pass and made his way toward the gate. His mind was already in Chicago, thinking about hugging his kids and sleeping in his own bed tonight. After all the stress and hard work of the acquisition, this moment felt like the beginning of something new, not just for his business portfolio, but for the thousands of employees who now counted on his leadership. What he didn't expect was that his journey home would take an unexpected turn right here at the boarding gate, one that would test his patience and ultimately change the culture of the very airline he had just purchased. Michael joined the small line forming at the gate, boarding pass in hand. He noticed how other first-class passengers were dressed, mostly business suits and designer dresses. An older gentleman in front of him wore an expensive watch that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Michael glanced down at his own casual clothes and smiled to himself. He'd long ago stopped caring about dressing to impress others. Success, in his experience, was about results, not appearances. When his turn came, Michael approached the gate with a friendly smile. The gate agent, Jessica Winters, barely looked up from her computer as she held out her hand for his boarding pass. She was in her mid-30s with her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, her blue uniform crisp and unwrinkled. "Good morning," Michael said, handing over his ticket. Jessica glanced at him, then at his boarding pass, then back at him again. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she noticed the first-class designation. She frowned. "Sir, we're currently boarding first-class passengers only," she said, her voice carrying that customer service politeness that didn't quite reach her eyes. Michael nodded. "Yes, I know. I have a first-class ticket." He pointed to the boarding pass still in her hand. Jessica looked at the pass again, more carefully this time. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "May I see your ID, please?" Though the request wasn't unusual, something in her tone made several nearby passengers turn their heads. Michael kept his expression neutral as he pulled out his wallet and handed over his driver's license. Jessica compared his ID to the boarding pass with unusual scrutiny. She typed something into her computer, glancing between the screen and Michael's face multiple times. "Is there a problem?" Michael asked quietly. "Just one moment, sir." Jessica's voice was clipped as she continued to tap on her keyboard. The line behind Michael grew, with several passengers shifting impatiently. A businessman behind Michael cleared his throat loudly. "What's the holdup?" Jessica ignored him, focusing intently on Michael. "Sir, how did you obtain this ticket?" The question hung in the air. Michael blinked, taken aback by the directness of it. "The same way everyone else did, I imagine. I booked it through the airline's website." He kept his voice calm, though he could feel a familiar tension building in his shoulders, a tension he'd experienced many times before in situations just like this one. Jessica's expression remained skeptical. "This first-class ticket was purchased just yesterday. That's unusually last minute for our premium cabin." "I had a change of plans," Michael explained, conscious of the growing audience around them. "I needed to stay in Atlanta an extra day for business." A woman waiting in line whispered something to her companion. Michael caught the words "probably using points" and "upgrade" in her hushed tone. "I'll need to verify this ticket," Jessica announced, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Could you please step to the side while the other passengers board?" Michael took a deep breath. He'd been flying first class for years, and this was far from the first time he faced this kind of treatment. Usually he would comply quietly, not wanting to make a scene. But today, after closing the biggest deal of his career, a deal that made him the owner of this very airline, something inside him resisted. "No," he said firmly but politely. "My ticket is valid. I've been asked to step aside at gates before, and I'm not doing it today. You have my ID and my boarding pass. If there's a legitimate issue with my ticket, I'd like to know exactly what it is." The gate area had grown noticeably quieter. Jessica's cheeks flushed as she realized people were watching. "Sir, I'm just following protocol," she insisted, though her voice had lost some of its authority. "Which protocol is that exactly?" Michael asked. He wasn't raising his voice, but his words carried weight. "The one that applies when someone doesn't look the way you think a first-class passenger should look." Jessica's eyes widened. "That's not. I didn't." She stopped herself, then reached for the phone at her station. "I'm going to need my supervisor to sort this out." As she made the call, Michael stood his ground, aware of the dozens of eyes now fixed on this unfolding drama. After nearly 20 years in business, he knew one thing for certain. What happened next would reveal far more about Skywave Airlines than it would about him. The tension at Gate B14 was thick enough to cut with a knife. Michael stood calmly at the counter while Jessica spoke in hushed tones on the phone, occasionally glancing up at him with nervous eyes. Around them, the boarding process had ground to a halt. First-class passengers who had yet to board were checking their watches and shifting their weight from one foot to another. "What's going on?" A woman in a business suit asked loudly from the back of the line. "They're not letting that man board," someone else replied, not bothering to lower their voice. Michael felt a familiar heaviness settle in his chest. He'd been here before, standing alone while becoming an unwilling spectacle. 20 years of building businesses, creating jobs, and breaking barriers, yet moments like these could still make him feel like an outsider. He thought about all the times he'd swallowed his pride and stepped aside, telling himself it wasn't worth the fight. Not today, though, not with his airline. A young man nearby had his phone out, angled suspiciously in Michael's direction. Great, Michael thought. This would probably end up online before he even got home. "Sir," Jessica said, putting down the phone, "my supervisor will be here shortly. In the meantime, would you mind if we continued boarding the other passengers?" "That sounds reasonable," Michael replied, stepping slightly to the side but remaining clearly visible at the counter. But I'm still going to need an explanation for why my ticket requires special verification. Jessica avoided his gaze. It's just standard procedure for certain situations. What situations would those be? Michael asked, keeping his voice level despite his rising frustration. Before Jessica could answer, a middle-aged woman who had been watching the scene unfold approached the counter. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Jessica, "I couldn't help noticing what's happening here. I'm a frequent flyer with Skywave, and I've never been asked to step aside for ticket verification when boarding first class." Jessica's face reddened. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you." "I think it does," the woman persisted. "It concerns all of us when we see unfair treatment." A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Michael gave the woman a grateful nod, touched by her willingness to speak up. Jessica's discomfort was now plainly visible. "I'm just doing my job," she insisted, her voice higher than before. "There was a flag in the system." "What kind of flag?" Michael pressed. "I'm not at liberty to discuss that," Jessica replied, clearly flustered. An older gentleman in the boarding line shook his head. "I've been flying first class with Skywave for 15 years, and I've never heard of such a flag." The situation was quickly spiraling beyond Jessica's control. More passengers were openly watching now, some whispering to each other, others looking uncomfortable at the obvious discrimination playing out before them. "Look," Michael said, keeping his voice reasonable, "I understand you have a job to do, but I also have a right to be treated with the same respect as any other passenger. If there's a legitimate reason to question my ticket, I'd like to know what it is." A young man in the crowd called out, "It's because you're black, man." "That's the only flag in the system." His blunt assessment caused several people to gasp. Jessica's eyes widened in alarm. "That is absolutely not true. Skywave Airlines does not discriminate based on race or any other factor." "Then why am I still standing here?" Michael asked quietly. The question hung in the air, unanswered. A few passengers had pulled out their phones, some openly recording now. Michael noticed but didn't react. Part of him wanted to just walk away from the whole mess, but a stronger part remembered all the times he'd faced situations like this and stayed silent. How many others had been humiliated this way and had no platform to speak up? Just then, a man in a Skywave management uniform hurried toward the gate, his face already set in an apologetic expression. Michael recognized him immediately as Thomas Grant, the regional operations manager he'd met during the acquisition meetings. Thomas slowed his pace as he approached, recognition dawning in his eyes. His mouth fell open slightly as the reality of the situation became clear to him. The supervisor looked from Jessica to Michael and back again, his face draining of color as he realized exactly who was being held up at the gate. In that moment, Michael knew the dynamic was about to change dramatically, and he wasn't sure if he was looking forward to what came next or dreading it. Thomas Grant froze mid-step as his eyes locked with Michael's. For a moment, nobody spoke. The background noise of the busy airport seemed to fade away as the supervisor's mind visibly raced to process what was happening. "Mr. Richardson," Thomas finally managed, his voice coming out higher than normal. I didn't expect to see you here today." A confused look flashed across Jessica's face. "You know this passenger?" she asked, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. Thomas nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Michael's. "Yes, I do." He straightened his tie nervously and extended his hand to Michael. "Mr. Richardson, please accept my deepest apologies for this misunderstanding. You should have been boarding already." The shift in atmosphere was immediate and almost comical. Jessica's expression transformed from suspicious authority to utter confusion. "Is there still an issue with my ticket?" Michael asked calmly, making no move to shake the offered hand. Thomas shook his head vigorously. "No, sir, absolutely not. There never was." He turned to Jessica, lowering his voice slightly but not enough to prevent nearby passengers from hearing. "Jessica, this is Michael Richardson. He's—" Thomas hesitated, glancing around at the crowd of onlookers. "Go ahead," Michael said, crossing his arms. "I think everyone here deserves to know why I'm suddenly welcome aboard." Thomas swallowed hard. "Mr. Richardson is the new owner of Skywave Airlines. The acquisition was finalized yesterday." The gate area erupted in murmurs and gasps. Jessica's face drained of all color. She looked as if someone had just pulled the floor out from under her feet. "The owner?" she repeated faintly. "But I thought—" She stopped herself, realizing there was no good way to finish that sentence. "You thought what?" Michael asked, his voice still level but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "That I couldn't afford a first-class ticket? That I stole someone's boarding pass? What exactly made you so sure I didn't belong here?" Jessica's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. A few feet away, someone whispered, "Oh snap," loudly enough for everyone to hear. Thomas jumped in, clearly trying to salvage the situation. "Mr. Richardson, please, if you'd like to board now, I can personally escort you to your seat. The flight crew has been notified of your presence on today's flight." "Has the flight crew also been notified that I was just held up at the gate because your agent couldn't believe someone who looks like me might be flying first class?" Michael asked. The blunt question hung in the air. Thomas's professional smile faltered. An older woman waiting to board spoke up from the line. "They should all be notified. This was shameful to watch." "Totally," agreed another passenger, a young man in a college sweatshirt. "I've got the whole thing on video if you need it, sir." Michael nodded thankfully to them both but returned his attention to Thomas and Jessica. "I don't want special treatment because I own the airline. I want the same treatment every passenger deserves, respect and dignity." Jessica finally found her voice, though it was barely above a whisper. "Mr. Richardson, I am so sorry. I didn't mean to." She stopped, tears welling in her eyes. For the first time since the confrontation began, Michael felt his anger soften slightly. The woman before him wasn't just an embodiment of discrimination, she was also someone whose job might now be in jeopardy because of a mistake, a serious one, but still a mistake. "We'll discuss this later," he said, more to Thomas than to Jessica. "Right now, I'd like to board my flight home. I've been away from my family long enough." Thomas nodded quickly, relief washing over his face. "Of course, sir. Right this way." As Michael finally moved toward the jet bridge, boarding pass in hand, he could feel dozens of eyes following him. Some passengers nodded respectfully as he passed. Others still looked shocked by the revelation. One man even tried to snap a photo before his wife swatted his arm down. Michael's mind was already racing ahead to the conversations this incident would require once he landed in Chicago. This wasn't just about one uncomfortable moment at an airport gate anymore. This was about the culture of the entire airline he now owned and the changes that would need to happen starting today. Michael settled into his spacious first-class seat, placing his messenger bag under the seat in front of him. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the tension of the confrontation slowly drain from his shoulders. When he opened them again, a flight attendant was hovering nearby, practically bouncing on her toes. "Mr. Richardson, can I get you anything before takeoff? Perhaps some champagne? Or I could see if we have any special snacks in the galley." Her smile was so wide it looked almost painful. "Just water for now, thank you," Michael replied, noticing how she lingered a bit too long, clearly hoping to make a good impression on the airline's new owner. As she hurried off, Michael pulled out his phone. The notification bar was already filling up with alerts. He opened his messages to find a text from his assistant. "Are you okay? Video from ATL gate going viral. Call when you can." Michael sighed. Of course it was going viral. He opened Twitter and quickly found what he was looking for. Already several videos were circulating, most with captions like, "Black man humiliated by gate agent until they discover he owed as the airline," and "Watch racist gate agent's face when she learns who she's messing with." The comments section was a battlefield of opinions. Some people were applauding him for standing his ground. Others were calling for Jessica to be fired immediately. A few were even questioning whether the story was real or staged for attention. Michael put his phone away as the flight attendant returned with his water, accompanied by the lead flight attendant who introduced herself with an almost comical level of deference. "Mr. Richardson, it's an absolute honor to have you on board today. I want to personally assure you that what happened at the gate does not reflect our values as a team on this aircraft." Michael thanked her politely but made it clear he just wanted a quiet flight. As they moved away, he overheard other first-class passengers whispering about him. A businessman across the aisle kept glancing in his direction, clearly wanting to strike up a conversation with the now famous airline owner. The plane began its pushback from the gate. Michael gazed out the window, watching ground crew workers direct the aircraft. Just yesterday, he had signed papers making him responsible for over 5,000 employees, from pilots and flight attendants to the very ground crew he was watching now. And of course, gate agents like Jessica. His phone buzzed with an incoming call from his PR director. He silenced it. The issues at play here went deeper than public relations. They touched on corporate culture, training, hiring practices, and values. This wasn't just about one embarrassing incident, it was about what kind of company Skywave would become under his leadership. As the plane taxied toward the runway, a flight attendant made her final check of seatbelts. She paused near Michael. "Sir, I just wanted to say..." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "Many of us have been hoping for new leadership for a long time. Things have been, well, let's just say there are issues that never get addressed." Michael studied her face, seeing sincerity in her expression. "What kind of issues?" "The kind that happened to you today," she replied quietly. "But usually there's no one recording, and the passengers don't own the airline." She gave him a meaningful look before moving on to check the next row. The plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the air. As Atlanta grew smaller below them, Michael's thoughts solidified. By the time they reached cruising altitude, he had gone from angry and embarrassed to focused and determined. He pulled out his laptop and opened a new document. At the top, he typed, "Skywave Airlines Cultural Transformation Initiative." Below it, he began listing ideas, starting with comprehensive bias training for all customer-facing staff. The incident at the gate would not be swept under the rug with a simple apology or the firing of one employee. No, Michael decided as his fingers flew across the keyboard, this would be the catalyst for real change. He had bought an airline. Now he would transform it, not just for himself, but for every passenger who had ever felt unwelcome or disrespected because of how they looked. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from his wife. "Just saw the video. You okay? Love you." With that simple message, Michael felt grounded again. He was doing this for something bigger than himself or even Skywave Airlines. He was doing it for a future where his own children wouldn't have to face the same barriers he had. Michael's driver was waiting for him at Chicago O'Hare, holding a sign with his name. The older man smiled warmly as Michael approached. "Welcome home, Mr. Richardson. How was your flight?" "The flight was fine, Pete. Everything before it." Michael shook his head. "That's a longer story." "So I've heard," Pete replied, taking Michael's bag. "My daughter called me about an hour ago, said you're all over the internet." Michael groaned. "That was fast." "She follows all those viral video accounts," Pete explained as they walked to the car. "Said she was proud of how you handled yourself." The drive from the airport was filled with urgent calls. Michael's PR team was in crisis mode. His executive assistant had scheduled an emergency meeting with Skywave's leadership team for tomorrow morning, and his lawyer wanted to discuss potential legal ramifications. Through it all, Michael kept coming back to one thought. This wasn't about damage control. This was about meaningful change. When they finally pulled up to his house, Michael could see his kids peering through the front window. The moment he stepped out of the car, the front door burst open and two excited children raced down the steps. "Dad," his 10-year-old son yelled, reaching him first and throwing his arms around Michael's waist. His 7-year-old daughter wasn't far behind, grabbing his arm and bouncing up and down. "We saw you on Mom's phone," his daughter said, eyes wide. "You're famous." Michael exchanged a look with his wife, who was standing in the doorway. She gave him a small shrug and a smile that said, "What could I do? It was everywhere." Later that evening, after the kids were in bed, Michael and his wife sat in the kitchen, cups of tea growing cold between them as he recounted the full story. "I'm proud of you," she said when he finished, "but I'm not surprised. This is why you wanted to buy Skywave in the first place, isn't it? You always said it was about more than just adding another company to your portfolio." Michael nodded, remembering the conversations they'd had months ago when he first considered the acquisition. People spend hours of their lives on planes, often during important moments, going to weddings, funerals, job interviews, moving to new cities. How they're treated matters. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Are you going to fire the gate agent?" Michael thought about Jessica's face when she realized who he was, the fear, the shock, The shame. No, he said finally. Firing her wouldn't solve the real problem. She's a symptom, not the cause. His phone buzzed with another call, his fourth from the head of HR at Skywave. He let it go to voicemail. They're all panicking, he explained to his wife. Worried about lawsuits, bad publicity, boycotts. But they're missing the point. This isn't just a PR crisis to manage. It's an opportunity to build something better. The next morning, Michael arrived at Skywave's Chicago headquarters before 7 a.m. The building was mostly empty, but he could hear voices coming from the main conference room. He paused outside the door, listening to the anxious discussion within. We need to issue a stronger statement, someone was saying. Make it clear this was an isolated incident. But was it? Another voice countered. You know, we've had complaints before. That's different, the first voice insisted. Those were never proven. Michael pushed open the door. 6 executives sat around the table, papers and coffee cups scattered between them. All conversation stopped instantly. Mr. Richardson, the chief operating officer said, standing quickly. We were just discussing our response to yesterday's unfortunate incident. Michael set his briefcase on the table and looked around at the nervous faces. These were experienced airline executives, people who had been running Skywave long before he bought it. They were experts at navigating turbulence, both in the air and in public relations, but what was happening now required more than damage control. Before we talk about our response, Michael said, taking a seat at the head of the table, I want to talk about our responsibility. Not just to me, but to every passenger who boards our planes feeling unwelcome or out of place. Because yesterday wasn't just about one gate agent making a bad call. It was about a culture that made her comfortable making that call in the first place. The room fell silent as the executives exchanged glances. Michael opened his briefcase and pulled out the document he'd worked on during his flight home, now expanded into a full proposal. I've done some thinking, he said, sliding copies across the table, about where we go from here. 6 months had passed since that fateful day at Atlanta International Airport. Michael stood at the back of a large training room at Skywave's headquarters, watching as 50 employees listened intently to a speaker at the front. The room was diverse. Pilots in their uniforms sat next to baggage handlers, flight attendants, and gate agents. Everyone wore name tags, and Michael spotted Jessica's among them. She looked different now, more confident, less rigid. When she spoke up to share her thoughts with the group, her voice carried clearly across the room. I thought I was just following procedures, she was saying. But I wasn't. I was making assumptions based on how someone looked, not who they were. She paused, finding Michael at the back of the room. They exchanged a small nod before she continued. That day changed my life, but it also changed Skywave for the better. Michael slipped out quietly as the trainer resumed the session. This was the 20th Respect in the Air workshop his company had conducted since he'd introduced the program. When he'd first proposed using his own experience as a case study for bias training, the executives had been skeptical. When he'd suggested Jessica should help lead the sessions rather than be fired, they'd been shocked. You want to put her in front of other employees? The HR director had asked incredulously. After what she did. After what we allowed her to do, Michael had corrected gently. By not addressing the biases built into our company culture. Now, walking through the terminal at O'Hare, where Skywave operated its busiest hub, Michael could already see changes. Gate agents made eye contact with every passenger, regardless of appearance. Signs in multiple languages welcomed travelers. A new customer feedback system had been implemented with specific questions about how respected passengers felt during their journey. Michael's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. They're ready for you in the conference room. Inside, a group of journalists and industry representatives waited for Skywave's press conference. 6 months ago, they had gathered to hear about the viral incident. Today, they were here for a different reason. Ladies and gentlemen, the PR director began. Thank you for joining us today as Skywave Airlines announces the results of our Cultural Transformation Initiative. Michael took the podium and looked out at the crowd. Camera flashes popped as he began to speak. 6 months ago, I experienced something that many travelers face every day, being judged not by my ticket, but by my appearance. As the new owner of Skywave, I could have simply fired one employee and issued an apology. Instead, we chose to look deeper. He clicked to the first slide of his presentation, showing statistics from Skywave's customer satisfaction surveys. The numbers told a clear story. Overall satisfaction had risen 24% in 6 months, with the biggest gains among minority passengers. We implemented comprehensive training for all 5,200 Skywave employees. We revised hiring practices to build a workforce that reflects the diversity of our passengers. And we created accountability systems where none existed before. A hand raised in the audience. Mr. Richardson, industry analysts said these changes would cost too much and passengers wouldn't notice. What do you say to that? Michael smiled. Our bookings are up 18% this quarter. It turns out respect is good business. Another reporter asked, what happened to the gate agent from the video? Jessica Winters. Ms. Winters is now one of our most valuable team members, Michael replied. She heads our frontline training program and shares her experience with every new hire. People can change when given the chance, and organizations can too. After the press conference, Michael found Jessica waiting near his office. I saw the numbers from today's announcement, she said. It's incredible what we've accomplished. What you've helped accomplish, Michael corrected. Your willingness to be part of the solution made all the difference. I almost quit that day, Jessica admitted. I was so embarrassed, so ashamed. I'm glad you didn't, Michael said simply. They walked together toward the terminal, where a group of new trainees was gathering for a tour. As they approached, Michael stepped back, giving Jessica the space to lead. Good morning, everyone, she began confidently. Welcome to your first day at the new Skywave Airlines. My name is Jessica, and I have an important story to share with you about why the way we see our passengers matters. Michael watched as the trainees leaned in, already engaged. What had started as a humiliating moment at an airport gate had transformed not just one company, but was beginning to influence the entire industry. Sometimes, he reflected, the most powerful changes come not from avoiding difficult moments, but from facing them head-on.